Hello, and welcome. Tonight we are going somewhere far away, somewhere the air smells of salt and tar and black powder. Settle in. Pull the covers close. Let the noise of the modern world fall away, and come with me across the water to a time when the Caribbean Sea was the most dangerous and most free place on Earth. This is a story about pirates. Not the ones from films or storybooks, with clean swords and charming smiles. These were real men, and a few remarkable women who chose to live outside the boundaries of every empire. Their lives were often short, their endings were frequently violent. But the world they built aboard their ships was unlike anything the age had ever seen. To understand them, we must first understand the world that made them, and that world was built on war. For more than a decade, from 1701 to 1714, the great powers of Europe tore each other apart in a conflict called the War of the Spanish Succession. They fought over who would control the staggering wealth that flowed from the New World. During those years, governments on every side issued documents called letters of marque to private ship captains. These authorized them to attack and plunder enemy vessels. The men who carried them were called privateers, legal pirates, armed and blessed by a king to rob and burn and sink in the name of their nation. Thousands of skilled sailors earned their living this way. Then, in 1713 and 1714, the treaties were signed. The war ended. The letters of marque were revoked. Almost overnight, an entire generation of experienced, battle-hardened sailors found themselves without work. The Royal Navy discharged thousands of men onto the docks of Bristol, London, and Plymouth, with little more than the clothes on their backs. These men stood on cold quaysides and looked out at a world that had no place for them. Merchant ships offered brutal conditions and terrible wages. The dockyards had more hands than work. Former sailors begged for bread in port town doorways, or drank away their last pay in damp taverns that smelled of stale beer and wet wool. But far to the west, across the Atlantic, another world was waiting. The Caribbean Sea was a vast, shimmering theater of commerce. Merchant ships heavy with the wealth of empires sailed its warm waters in long, slow convoys. Their holds carried barrels of Muscovado sugar, great bales of tobacco, sacks of indigo dye, and bolts of silk shipped from the ports of the East. The geography itself seemed designed for ambush. Hundreds of small islands, hidden coves, and shallow channels offered shelter to a fast ship. The trade winds blew in predictable patterns, funneling merchant traffic through a handful of narrow passages. A patient hunter could watch those passages for weeks from the shade of a palm-fringed shore. In the center of it all sat the island of New Providence in the Bahamas. Its harbor at Nassau was too shallow for the heavy warships of the Royal Navy, but perfectly suited for the light, fast sloops that pirates favored. By 1715, with no functioning governor and no garrison, Nassau was becoming something the world had not seen before. Former privateers drifted in. Discharged naval sailors followed. Runaway indentured servants, fugitives, and outcasts from a dozen nations arrived by ones and twos. Canvas tents and rough wooden shacks lined the beach, the harbor filled with stolen ships. At its peak, nearly 1,000 pirates called Nassau home, outnumbering the town's remaining lawful citizens 10 to 1. But the spark that truly ignited the Golden Age had been struck 20 years earlier by a man whose name was already legend. His name was Henry Every. In 1695, Every, a former Royal Navy sailor turned mutineer, had led a small pirate fleet into the Indian Ocean and attacked a treasure convoy belonging to the Grand Mughal of India. The prize was a ship called the Ganges Sawai, one of the largest vessels in the Mughal fleet. Every's crew overwhelmed its defenders and seized a cargo of gold, silver, jewels and ivory, worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. It was, by many estimates, the single most profitable act of piracy in history. And then Henry Every did what almost no pirate had ever done. He vanished. He sailed to the Bahamas, bribed the corrupt local governor, and disappeared from history entirely. Whether Every truly enjoyed his fortune or died in poverty, cheated by dishonest merchants, as some later stories whispered, no one knew for certain. The mystery only made the legend stronger. For a young sailor standing on a cold English dock in 1715, with no money, no prospects, and the memory of war still fresh in his hands, the story of Henry Every was not merely exciting. It was a road map. It pointed west, toward warm water, and the promise that a bold man with nothing to lose could change his fortune in a single afternoon. And so they went. They signed aboard merchant ships, or stole fishing boats, or found passage to the Caribbean by whatever means they could. They arrived in Nassau and found the harbor full of men just like themselves. Hard men, hungry men. Men with caw-loosed hands, empty pockets, and a burning desire to never again bow beneath a captain's lash. Some had been privateers, skilled in gunnery and boarding. Some had been pressed naval sailors who had tasted nothing but the lash and rotten biscuit. Some were escaped servants. A few were formerly enslaved men who found among the pirates a rough equality that existed nowhere else in the Atlantic world of 1715. The Golden Age of Piracy did not begin with a declaration or a famous battle. It began quietly in the decisions of thousands of ordinary, desperate people who looked at the life they had been given and decided it was not enough. The empires had built a world of wealth on the backs of men they treated as expendable. Now those same men were about to claim some of that wealth on their own terms, under their own rules, aboard ships they would govern themselves. They would create something no empire had ever intended, a rough, imperfect democracy on the open water, where every man had a vote, and every man received his share. The sugar and tobacco still moved across the Caribbean in heavy merchant convoys. The trade winds still blew their ancient, reliable courses through the island passages. But something had changed. Among the slow-moving cargo ships, faster shapes now waited in the shadows of unnamed coves, watching the horizon with hungry, patient eyes. In the harbors of a dozen islands, men who had once served kings were learning to serve only themselves. They sharpened their swords, they cleaned their pistols, they agreed upon their rules. And somewhere out beyond the harbor mouth of Nassau, where the shallow water turned from green to deep Atlantic blue, the age of the pirate was about to begin. Chapter 2, A Sailor's World. To understand why a man would choose piracy, you must first feel the weight of the life he was leaving behind. So let us step aboard a merchant vessel in the year 1716 and live one day through the eyes of an ordinary sailor. You are in your early 20s, from a small town near Bristol. This creaking ship has been your world for 6 months. It is 2 hours before dawn. The space around you is black and heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies and stale air. You are woken, not by light, but by a sharp voice. The boatswain, the senior sailor who commands the deck crew, has come from below to rouse your watch. His voice is hoarse and carries no warmth. You roll from your hammock. Your bare feet land on the wet planking of the deck, and the chill of the Atlantic night crawls up through the soles of your feet and into your bones. You pull on your damp shirt and follow the dark shapes of the other men toward the ladder that leads up into the open air. On deck, a fine spray of seawater hangs in the wind. Within minutes, your shirt is soaked through to the skin. Your hands find the ropes. They are thick, stiff with tar and salt. And after 6 months of hauling on them, the skin of your palms is a landscape of blisters and calluses that crack and bleed in the cold. The work is relentless. You climb the rigging, sometimes 30 meters into the air, to furl or unfurl the topsails. The ropes sway beneath you. The mast tilts with every roll of the ship. Below, the sea churns in the dark, a distant shifting blackness. A fall from this height means death, and there is nothing between you and the water but the strength of your grip. Back on deck, you are sent to work the pumps. Every wooden ship takes on water. It seeps through the seams of the hull, collects in the lowest part of the vessel, and must be pumped out by hand several times a day. The handle is heavy. You pump in a steady rhythm, listening to the slosh of foul water below. Later, when the sun has risen to a pale smear behind the clouds, you sit with a few other men and eat your morning ration. A biscuit called hardtack is placed in your hand. It is a flat disk of flour, water, and salt, baked so hard that it must be soaked before your teeth can crack it. You tap it against the planking first, a habit every sailor learns quickly. Small dark shapes fall from the biscuit and scatter across the wood. These are weevils, tiny black beetles that breed in the flour barrels. You brush them away without comment. Everyone does. Then you chew what remains. It tastes of nothing but survival. The meat, when there is meat, is salted beef or pork stored in barrels of brine for months. It has taken on a gray, fibrous texture that resists the jaw. It must be scraped of its thick crust of salt and soaked for hours before it can be eaten. You chew it slowly. It is fuel, not food. The water is worse than anything else. Stored in wooden casks in the hold, it begins to change within weeks of leaving port. A green film forms on its surface. It thickens, turns slimy, and takes on a smell that makes your stomach turn. You drink it anyway. There is nothing else. Only the daily ration of grog, rough rum mixed with water, does not make you gag. After months on this diet of salt and starch, you begin to notice changes in your body. Your gums grow tender and bleed when you chew. Old scars, long healed, begin to soften and itch. A deep, nameless exhaustion settles over you that sleep cannot cure. This is scurvy, the slow starvation of the body for what no one yet fully understands. You have seen men in the later stages. Their teeth loosen and fall out. Their skin darkens with bruises that appear from nowhere. Their minds grow confused and slow. It is a terrible death, and a common one. All of it caused by the absence of fresh fruit and green vegetables, nourishment that the barrels in the hold cannot provide. But of all the hardships, it is the discipline that breaks something inside a man. The captain of a merchant ship holds absolute authority. His word is law. There is no appeal, no court, no voice that speaks for the crew. His primary instrument of enforcement is the cat-o'-nine tails, a short wooden handle from which hang 9 knotted cords. When laid across a man's bare back, it opens the skin in parallel lines that bleed freely and heal slowly, if they heal at all. A flogging can be ordered for almost anything. Arguing with an officer, moving too slowly on the rigging, being in the wrong place, or simply being disliked by the man who holds the whip. You have seen a man receive 24 lashes for dropping a coil of rope. He bit through the leather strap placed between his teeth and made no sound. Afterward, his back was a ruin of red and white, and he went back to work within the hour, because there was no one to take his place, and no one who cared to let him rest. Your wages are a bitter joke. A common sailor is not paid until the voyage is completed. If the ship sinks, you receive nothing. If you die of fever halfway through the journey, your family receives nothing. And if you survive, the captain may deduct invented fines from your pay until a year of labor leaves you with barely enough silver to last a week. Some of the men beside you did not choose this life at all. They were pressed into service by armed squads acting under naval authority, seized from the streets of a port town, or dragged from the deck of another ship. In the Royal Navy, the conditions are the same or worse. The food, just as grim. The discipline, even harsher. And in the Navy, there is the added terror of battle, the shriek of a cannonball punching through the hull, the spray of wooden splinters that kill as surely as any blade. Your world exploding around you in smoke and screaming while you fight for a king who does not know your name. This is the world that waits for a sailor in the year 1716. An endless cycle of exhaustion, hunger, pain, and poverty with no retirement, no savings, and no path forward. Only the next voyage, and the next, until the sea or sickness finally claims you. In the quiet moments before sleep, you have heard stories, whispered tales about men who refused this life. And now, on a gray morning, as you stand at the rail with cracked hands and an empty stomach, squinting through salt-stung eyes, you see something. A strange sail, far away but closing fast, moving with a purpose and speed that your own heavy vessel cannot match. The men around you grow quiet, and deep beneath your exhaustion, something flickers to life. A small, dangerous spark. Chapter 3. A Strange Sail. The ship on the horizon grows larger with every passing minute. It is a sloop, smaller than your merchant vessel, but leaner and faster, cutting through the water at an angle that steadily closes the distance. It flies no colors you recognize. The men around you have stopped working. They stand at the rail, watching, and the silence on deck is heavier than any storm. Your captain appears from his cabin. He raises a brass spyglass to his eye and holds it there for a long time. When he lowers it, the color has drained from his face. He begins shouting orders, his voice tight and quick. Men scramble to adjust the sails, trying to coax more speed from your heavy hull. But it is no use. You notice that the approaching vessel is crowded with men, far more than a trading ship would ever carry. Their deck bristles with movement. You can see the dark mouths of cannon muzzles protruding from freshly cut gun ports along the hull. This is not a merchant vessel. This is not a naval patrol. This is a ship rebuilt for a single purpose. Then the moment arrives. A small blossom of white smoke appears from the sloop's bow. A second later, the deep boom of a cannon rolls across the water. A ball skips across the surface just ahead of your ship, sending up a plume of spray. It is a warning shot. Its message is as old as the ocean. Stop now, or the next one will not miss. Your captain is no fool. He knows his ship is slow, his crew is small, and his few light cannons are no match for a vessel built for war. His cargo is insured by wealthy men in London coffeehouses. His life is not. He gives the order to strike the colors, and the flag slides down the mast in surrender. The pirate sloop sweeps alongside with practiced ease. Grappling hooks sail through the air, iron claws biting deep into the wooden railing. Thick ropes pull taut, and the two hulls grind together with a low, shuddering crunch of timber. The gap between the vessels narrows to nothing, and then they are aboard. They come over the railing not as a mob, but as a confident, coordinated team. You see now that they are sailors just like you. Their faces are weathered by the same sun and salt. Their hands bear the same calluses. But there is something different in the way they move, an ease and openness you have never seen on a merchant ship. Each man carries a pistol tucked into his belt and a cutlass at his side. They disarm your officers quickly, without unnecessary violence, and gather your crew on the main deck. You stand in a line, heart pounding, expecting the worst. But the worst does not come. Instead, a man steps forward who is clearly in charge, though he is not the captain. This is the quartermaster. On a pirate ship, he is the second in command, the man who represents the crew's interests, handles discipline, and oversees the division of plunder. In daily life, he often holds more authority than the captain himself. His voice, when he speaks, is calm and direct. He scans the line of captive faces without hurry. He asks your crew a simple question. Is anyone here held against his will? Has any man aboard been pressed into service or brought here by force? A few hands rise, hesitantly. The quartermaster nods. Any man who was forced to serve, he says, is free to say so now, and no harm will come to him. This is not the Navy. Then he lays out his offer. They have no interest in harming ordinary sailors. They are here for the cargo and the ship's stores. But anyone who wishes to join their company may do so freely. You will receive no wages. Instead, you will earn a full and equal share of every prize the crew takes together. He lets the words settle across the silent deck. You look at the faces of your crewmates. For most, fear holds them still. They have families in England, a life to return to, and a deep terror of the hangman's noose that awaits any convicted pirate. They stare at the deck and say nothing. The choice, for them, is already made. They will stay with the merchant ship and continue the life they know. But you notice a few others, men like you, who have nothing waiting for them in any port. Men whose wages have been stolen, whose backs carry the scars of the lash, whose futures hold nothing but the same miserable voyages repeated until the sea claims them. You can see something behind their eyes, the same spark you feel in your own chest. The pirates do not force anyone. They have escaped tyranny themselves and want volunteers, brothers who will fight alongside them by choice. The quartermaster waits. The silence stretches across the deck, broken only by the creak of the hulls shifting together, the slap of water between the two ships, and the distant cry of a gull somewhere above. You step forward. Two other men step forward with you. The quartermaster grins, a brief flash of teeth in a sun-darkened face. He gestures for you to cross over. As you climb the railing, one foot on your old ship and one reaching for the new, you feel the weight of your former life falling away behind you, plank by plank. On the deck of the sloop, a pirate hands you a tin mug filled with a cloudy liquid. It is grog, the sailor's daily ration of watered-down rum, sometimes mixed with a squeeze of lime or a pinch of sugar. You have drunk grog 1,000 times. But this mug tastes different. It carries the warmth of something you have never had before. Your old vessel detaches from the grappling hooks and slowly drifts away. You watch it grow smaller against the horizon, its sails patched and gray, its deck empty of everything that once belonged to you. You feel no grief. That ship was never yours. This one, you are beginning to understand, might be. The water between you and your past grows wider. You stand among your new crewmates, the so-called enemies of all mankind, and the adrenaline fades into a quiet uncertainty. You have joined their society, but you do not yet know its laws. You do not understand how a ship full of men who have rejected authority can possibly hold together. The answer, you sense, is close. It is written down somewhere on this very ship. Chapter 4, The Articles of Agreement. A short while later, the quartermaster gathers you and the other new recruits near the mainmast. The rest of the crew drifts closer, leaning against barrels and coils of rope, watching with quiet interest. He reaches into a canvas bag and draws out a sheet of parchment, its edges worn soft from handling. He unrolls it across the flat lid of a powder barrel. This, he tells you, is the foundation of everything aboard this ship. It is the Articles of Agreement, the contract that every man has helped to write and every man has sworn to obey. You will hear it called the Pirate Code. It is less a code of honor than a practical constitution, born from the bitter experience of men who knew what unchecked authority felt like. You learn that these rules were not handed down from above. No king wrote them, no admiral imposed them. Before any voyage began, the entire crew gathered to debate, argue, and vote on every article. Every man from the captain to the youngest sailor had an equal voice. You have joined not merely a ship's crew but a floating republic, perhaps the only true democracy on the water. The quartermaster reads the first article aloud. Every man has an equal vote in affairs of the moment. Any major decision, whether to chase a prize, where to sail, how to punish an offense, is settled by the crew as a whole. You think of your old merchant captain, whose word was absolute, and the distance between that world and this one feels immense. The second article addresses the only question that truly matters to men who risk their lives at sea. No prey, no pay. You will receive no fixed wages. Your payment is a share of whatever the company takes together. The numbers are read aloud, so that every man understands them clearly, and no one can claim ignorance later. The captain receives 2 full shares in recognition of his skill and the weight of command in battle. The quartermaster receives 1.5. The surgeon and the carpenter, if the crew has them, receive a slightly larger portion than ordinary men. But you, as a common sailor, are entitled to 1 full share. No deductions, no invented fines. You think of the merchant voyages, where a year of labor left you with a few shillings after the captain's invented fines. Here, the share system is transparent. Everyone sees what is taken. Everyone sees what is divided. The quartermaster keeps the accounts, and they are open to any man who asks. The honesty is enforced by the crew itself. The third article governs how men live together in the tight, dangerous space of a ship. Any quarrel between 2 crewmates must be settled ashore, with pistols or swords if necessary. There are rules against certain conduct on board, designed to prevent jealousy and conflict from tearing a small crew apart in a space where men sleep within arm's reach of one another. Every man is expected to keep his weapons clean and ready for action at all times. A pistol that my fires during a boarding could cost a brother's life. This is not a suggestion. It is an obligation written into the contract, and the crew will hold you to it as surely as they hold the captain to his own duties. The fourth article surprises you with its practicality. Lights and candles are to be put out by 8 o'clock in the evening. This is not a bedtime. It is a fire rule. On a wooden ship filled with gunpowder, tarred rope, and dry canvas, a single careless flame from a gambling lantern could destroy the vessel and every soul aboard within minutes. Then comes the article that changes the way you think about everything. It is a system of compensation for injuries sustained in battle. A man who loses his right arm may be awarded 600 pieces of 8, the Spanish silver coin that serves as currency across the seas. The loss of a left arm, 500. A right leg, 500. An eye, 100. This money is paid from the ship's treasury before the rest of the plunder is divided. It is a promise that if you are maimed in service to your brothers, they will not abandon you. The amounts vary from crew to crew, and the most famous version belonged to the Welsh pirate Bartholomew Roberts, whose articles were the most detailed ever recorded. You begin to grasp what these men have built. It is not a kingdom. It is not an empire. It is an agreement among equals, fragile and imperfect, held together by ink and oath and the shared memory of powerlessness. Every rule on this parchment exists because someone, somewhere, once suffered its absence. The document smells of salt and old tobacco and human hands. The quartermaster finishes reading. He lays the parchment flat on the barrel lid and sets a small pot of ink beside it with a quill. He looks at you. This is the final step. To join the brotherhood, you must sign. By making your mark, you enter a contract. You agree to live by these rules, to fight for your brothers, and to accept the punishment if you fail. You take the offered quill, dip it in the dark ink, and scratch your mark on the page. Some men before you wrote their names in careful letters. Others left only an X. It does not matter. The mark is the bond. You are now a full member of the crew, with a vote and a share of any prize that falls to this company. The parchment is rolled and tucked away. You step back from the barrel and feel something settle over you, invisible but certain. You have signed away the world you knew. You now belong to a society of outlaws governed by its own laws, written in the language of men who once had nothing, and who built their own rules from the ground up. But a society is more than rules on paper. It is also the men who enforce them, the ones who carry the weight of leadership on their shoulders every day. Aboard this ship, that work falls to two very different figures. One commands in war, the other governs in peace. Together, they hold this fragile republic in balance. Chapter 5. The Captain and the Quartermaster. As the days pass aboard your new ship, you begin to watch the two men who hold it together. One is the captain. The other is the quartermaster. They move through different parts of the vessel and carry different kinds of weight. Between them, they have built something no empire ever intended. A government designed to prevent the tyranny both men once endured. The captain is quieter than you expected. He does not shout or strut the way your old merchant captain did. He spends much of his time in the small cabin at the stern, bent over his charts with a pair of brass dividers in his hand. He is the ship's navigator. On his skill with the stars and the currents, the lives of every man aboard depend. You learn that the captain was elected to his position. The crew chose him not because he was the strongest or the loudest, but because he was the most skilled sailor among them. He knows how to read the wind. He knows the channels between the islands. He knows when a distant cloud means a coming storm and how to steer away from it. His authority is absolute in one specific circumstance. When a prize is sighted, or when the ship comes under attack, the captain becomes the undisputed commander. In the chaos of battle, there is no time for debate. The crew places its trust in his judgment, and his orders are obeyed instantly by every man aboard, without question or hesitation. You see this happen for the first time when a sail appears to the east. The casual atmosphere of the ship sharpens in an instant. The captain steps onto the deck, and the crew falls silent. He studies the distant vessel through his glass, reads the wind, and begins giving commands. The helmsman turns the wheel. The gun crews take their positions. But here is the difference that separates this ship from every other vessel on the sea. As soon as the danger passes, the captain's power vanishes. He becomes once again a man among equals. He cannot order a flogging for a personal insult. He cannot change the ship's course on a whim. He cannot claim the best cabin without the crew's consent. If he proves to be a coward in battle, or consistently fails to find prizes, the crew can hold a vote and remove him at any time. A new captain will be elected, and the deposed man returns to the ranks as an ordinary sailor. The threat alone keeps most captains sharp and honest. Leadership here is earned daily, not inherited. The true power in daily life belongs to the quartermaster. You watch him move through the ship like a steady current beneath the surface. He is the one the men approach, with their complaints, their disputes, and their questions. He is not a warrior. He is something closer to a magistrate, a steward, and a protector rolled into one. Every morning and evening, the quartermaster oversees the portioning of food, water, and the treasured daily measure of grog. His job is to ensure that every man receives exactly his equal share. You watch him measure the rum with a careful, practiced hand, pouring it into each man's cup without favoritism. The ritual is the same every day, and it matters. When disputes arise, and on a crowded ship they always do, it is the quartermaster who settles them. Two men argue over a stolen knife. A card game ends in accusations. A sailor believes another took more than his share. These small grievances could turn violent in the cramped space below deck. The quartermaster listens, makes his ruling, and his word holds. He also carries a responsibility that reveals the system's deepest wisdom. If the articles call for a man to be punished, it is the quartermaster who administers the lash, not the captain. This is deliberate. By placing punishment in the hands of the crew's elected advocate, the pirates have stripped the captain of the power to use violence as a personal weapon. On merchant ships, a captain could flog a man he simply disliked. Here, that cruelty is impossible. The captain leads in battle. The quartermaster protects the crew from the captain in peace. It is a separation of powers, born from the memories of men who had been beaten and cheated by authority they could not challenge or escape. You notice something else. The captain eats the same food as the crew. He sleeps in a cabin only slightly larger than the space between two cannons. His share of the plunder is greater, but only by the margin the articles allow. He does not live in luxury while his crew starves. He does not dress in silk while they wear rags. The equality is rough, but real. There are moments when you forget these men are outlaws. You see the quartermaster sit with a young sailor who is homesick, speaking quietly while the watch changes overhead. You see the captain consult with the crew before choosing a heading, asking their knowledge of coastline he has not sailed. These small acts of respect feel extraordinary after the world you left behind. When a prize is taken, the quartermaster leads the boarding party. He decides what to remove from the captured vessel. He catalogs every barrel, every bolt of cloth, every coin. He guards the treasure until it can be sold and divided. No one touches the plunder without his knowledge, and no one questions his accounting. You see the design more clearly with each passing week. Two men, two kinds of power, one for war, one for peace. Neither can rule alone, and both serve at the pleasure of the crew. It is not perfect. Disagreements still flare and tempers still rise. But no single man can hold the kind of unchecked authority that made your old life unbearable. The captain stands at the helm. The quartermaster moves through the ship. Together, they keep this wooden republic afloat. And the ship itself, you are beginning to realize, is more than a vessel. It is a home, a workplace, a fortress, and a prison, all bound together by wood and tar. Now that you know who governs, it is time to see the place where you will live. Chapter 6: The Ship as Home. With the formalities behind you, you take your first proper look around the vessel. You are no longer a captive. You are a resident. This sloop, this lean and crowded wooden shell, is your home now. You begin to learn its spaces the way you would learn the rooms of a house, by feel, by smell, and by the particular sounds each part of it makes. The ship was not built for piracy. It was a merchant vessel once, captured and remade. Your crew has modified it in ways that change its nature entirely. More cannons line the deck than a trading ship would carry, their black iron muzzles staring out from freshly cut gun ports. The decks have been cleared of cargo clutter to make room for fighting. You walk the main deck and take in the controlled order. Thick coils of rope are neatly secured to cleats and pins. Pyramids of iron cannonballs sit in wooden cradles, held in place by netting. Spare spars are lashed along the ship's sides, ready to replace any that a storm or battle might shatter. Everything has its place, and everything is tied down against the roll of the sea. You close your eyes and listen. The ship speaks its own language. There is the deep, constant groan of hull timbers flexing against the water. There is the rhythmic lap of waves against the planking. Above, the canvas sails snap and fill, and somewhere higher still, a lonely gull cries out across the empty blue. It is a symphony of wood and wind and water. The smells are just as vivid. The clean bite of salt spray mixes with the pungent scent of hot tar. The crew uses tar constantly, brushing it onto ropes and into seams to protect the wood from salt water and sun. It is on your hands, in your clothes, in the air you breathe. After a few days aboard, you stop noticing it entirely. But the real heart of the ship lies below. You climb down through a square hatch in the deck, and the open sky vanishes. In its place comes a thick, warm darkness. This is the 'tween deck, the main living space. Its air wraps around you, like a damp blanket slept in too many times. You stoop beneath the low beams and wait for your eyes to adjust. The heat surprises you. Even in the cool of the evening, the bodies of 80 men generate a warmth that has nowhere to go. It collects in the still air between the beams and hangs there. You feel it settle on your skin like a second shirt. Above deck, the wind is your constant companion. Down here, the air barely moves at all. There are no private cabins here, no walls, no doors. This single low-ceilinged space is where you and 80 other men will eat, sleep, and pass the hours between watches. Lanterns cast small, swaying circles of yellow light that make the shadows leap and shift with every roll of the hull. The darkness between the lights feels thick enough to touch. The hammocks hang from the beams in long, close rows. Each one is a length of canvas slung at both ends, and they are strung so near together that you can reach out and touch the man beside you. You learn that European sailors adopted hammocks from the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean, a solution to the problem of sleeping on a ship that never stops moving. Unlike a bunk or a mattress on the floor, a hammock sways with the roll of the vessel, cradling you instead of throwing you against the planking. On rough nights, it holds you steady while the world tilts and heaves around you. In time, it becomes the most comfortable place on the ship. Your own small territory, in a world that offers no privacy at all. The air below deck carries a complex mixture of smells: unwashed bodies, stale rum, damp wool drying in the gloom, tobacco smoke that clings to the wood, and beneath it all, rising from somewhere deeper, a foul, sour stench that catches in the back of your throat. You ask about it. Someone points downward, toward the darkness below the lowest deck. This is the bilge, the very bottom of the hull, where all the foul water of the vessel collects. Seawater that seeps through the planking, spilled food, and every kind of waste that gravity pulls downward. All of it gathers here and sloshes back and forth into a putrid, greenish soup. Its smell rises through the wood and permeates every space above. No amount of pumping or scrubbing ever truly defeats it. The bilge is the price of living on the water, and every sailor pays it. You will grow accustomed to the smell the way you grew accustomed to hardtack and sore hands. It becomes, in time, simply the scent of the place where you live. A constant, invisible companion beneath your feet. You find an empty space between two cannons and are shown how to sling your own hammock. The hooks are already set in the beam above. You thread the canvas through, pull it taut, and climb in. The fabric wraps around you and you sway gently, listening to the ship settling into evening. The creak of wood, the murmur of voices, the distant wash of the sea. In this narrow strip of canvas, surrounded by the breathing of 80 men, you understand something essential. There is no solitude here. Every meal, every argument, every hour of sleep happens within arm's reach of your brothers. The articles and their strict rules against fighting on board make perfect sense now. In a space this intimate, small grievances must be governed, or they will burn. You close your eyes. The hammock rocks you. The ship groans around you like a living thing settling into sleep. Somewhere above, a watch bell rings twice, and footsteps cross the deck overhead. Tomorrow you will learn the rhythm that governs every hour of this floating world. The relentless cycle of work and rest that the sea demands and never lets you forget. Chapter 7. Work and Watch. You wake to the rocking of your hammock. The space is dark, but around you, men are stirring. Canvas rustles, bare feet scrape on damp wood. Your first full day as a working member of the crew is about to begin. The question that followed you into sleep returns now with the morning. What do you actually do all day? The answer comes quickly. A pirate ship is a complex machine, and it demands constant attention. Your day is governed by the watch system. The crew is divided into two halves. Your half is on duty for 4 hours, then off for the next 4, in a cycle that repeats day and night without pause. There is no weekend. There is no holiday. During your hours on watch, the most important task is sailing the ship. You and your watchmates are constantly trimming the sails, hauling on ropes to adjust their angle and catch the wind. It is a delicate art, a continuous conversation between the crew, the canvas, and the shifting air above. You learn it by feel, by sound, by the pull of the rope in your hands. But most of the work is maintenance. You spend hours sitting on the deck with a mallet and chisel, performing a task called caulking. This means hammering sticky, tarred rope fibers called okokum into the seams between the planks. It is slow and tedious, but it keeps the ship from taking on water. Without it, the sea would swallow you from below. Other days you are sent aloft with a bucket of tar to coat the rigging. The ropes that hold the masts and control the sails must be protected from sun and salt, or they will rot and snap without warning. You climb above the deck, balancing on a foot rope with the world swaying beneath you, and brush the tar on thick and dark. You scrub the decks to scour away the slippery green algae that grows in the damp air. A man who slips on a wet deck during a chase or a battle is a man who could die, or worse, fail his brothers at the moment they need him most. The work is unglamorous. The reason behind it is deadly serious. So you scrub until the wood is pale and clean. You check the cannons, making sure each is secure in its carriage, that the mechanisms are clean, and that the gunpowder stored nearby is perfectly dry. Damp powder does not ignite. A cannon that fails during a broadside is a gap in the ship's defenses that could cost everyone their lives. You learn to treat the guns with a careful, almost reverent attention. Sometimes you are assigned lookout duty. You climb the rigging to the crow's nest, a small platform near the top of the mainmast. The view is immense, a full circle of ocean stretching to the horizon. Your job is to stare into that emptiness for hours, searching for the one thing that matters. Another sail. A fleck of white against the endless blue. It is a lonely, hypnotic task. The wind is stronger up here, and the mast sways in long arcs that make the horizon tilt. The sun beats on your neck. The hours stretch into one another. You scan the line where sky meets water, looking for a merchant ship heavy with cargo, or the dark shape of a naval vessel coming to hunt you down. When your watch ends, you are relieved by the other half of the crew. But your free time is not rest. This is when you eat your rations. This is when you find time to sleep, gathering strength for the next shift. And this is when you attend to your own small maintenance, the tasks that keep you, and not just the ship, in working order. You sharpen your knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scraping familiar across the deck. You mend a tear in your shirt, with heavy needle and coarse thread. You wash your spare clothes in a bucket of seawater, which never truly gets them clean, but removes the worst of the salt and sweat. These small tasks fill the hours and keep your hands busy. The work is nearly identical to the labor you performed on the merchant ship. The ropes are the same. The sails are the same. And yet everything feels different. There is no bosun screaming from above. No officer threatening the lash for a moment of slowness. The men work with a quiet efficiency, born not of fear but of shared ownership in the vessel beneath their feet. You are a shareholder in this enterprise. A well-maintained ship is a faster ship, more likely to catch a prize. A clean cannon will fire true when needed. Every task contributes to your own fortune. The knowledge changes the feel of every rope in your hands. You work not because someone forces you, but because the ship is yours, and every knot you tie protects your future. The mood aboard is lighter than anything you knew before. Men talk while they work, sharing stories or news from the last port. A joke passes down the line of men, hauling on a rope, and laughter follows. No one is beaten for smiling. No one is flogged for speaking. The difference between this deck and the one you left is not in the labor. It is in the air. You notice the men take pride in their ship. A sailor who spots a fraying line replaces it without being told. Another patches a tear in the mainsail during his off-watch hours, simply because it needs doing. The ship belongs to everyone, and everyone treats it accordingly. On a merchant vessel, men did the minimum required. Here, they do what the ship needs. The days bleed into one another, marked only by the watch and the sun's slow arc. Work, eat, sleep, work. The rhythm becomes the pulse of your existence. The great enemy on these long voyages is not the navy or the storm. It is the vast boredom of the open sea, the monotony that can hollow a man out if he has nothing to look forward to. But there is one thing you look forward to, every day, without fail. The food may be grim and the water foul, but the ritual of eating is the anchor of each day's rhythm. What fills your belly determines whether you arrive at the next prize strong and ready, or weakened by hunger and disease. At sea, the question of food is never a small one. Chapter 8: Bread, Salt, and Stolen Wine. The daily ration arrives in the same form every morning. A piece of hardtack is placed in your hand. A portion of salted meat is cut from the barrel. A measure of dried peas or oatmeal completes the meal. It is a diet designed for preservation, not pleasure, built to last months in the damp hold of a ship. It tastes of salt and patience and nothing else. The grog is the bright moment. Every day, at a time, the quartermaster announces, "The rum barrel is opened and each man receives his measure." The rum is mixed with water, sometimes with a squeeze of lime or a spoonful of sugar, and poured into tin mugs. You hold the cup in both hands and drink slowly. It is warmth in a world of gray. You realize that the standard pirate ration is disappointingly similar to the merchant ship's grim menu. The same biscuit, the same tough, salty meat, the same dried legumes. But here is where your new life shows its edge. Unlike a merchant ship bound to a schedule and a destination, a pirate vessel is master of its own time and its own course. Your captain is not rushing to deliver cargo. No merchant waits at the other end to dock your pay for tardiness. This freedom gives you something no merchant sailor possesses: the ability to stop, to hunt, to fish, and to feed yourselves from the land and sea whenever the stores run low. The ocean and the islands become your pantry. If supplies grow scarce, the ship might anchor off a small, uninhabited island. The crew goes ashore in longboats, armed not for battle but for the hunt. You spend a day tracking wild pigs or goats through the thick tropical brush, glad for the feel of solid ground. The animals are driven toward the beach, where the real work begins. the crew builds a fire on the sand and roasts the fresh meat over a wooden frame called a boucan. This word gave the Caribbean pirates one of their earliest names, buccaneers. The smell of roasting pork drifts across the beach and over the water. The taste of fresh meat after weeks of brine is a luxury so deep it feels like the first meal you have ever eaten. At sea, men trail fishing lines from the stern, hoping for tuna or bonito. A good catch is shared among the crew and cooked over the galley fire. But the most prized catch is the sea turtle. Turtles are plentiful in the Caribbean, easy to spot sleeping on the surface, and a single large one can feed the entire crew for a day. The turtles can be kept alive on deck, turned on their backs, for weeks. This means fresh meat that does not spoil, a living larder carried aboard the ship. The crew tends them carefully, knowing each one represents meals that will keep scurvy at bay and strength in their arms. A turtle on deck is worth more than a coin in the pocket. There is something almost domestic about these moments. Men fishing from the stern in the quiet of the afternoon, the cook tending a pot of turtle stew over the galley fire, a sailor peeling a stolen orange with a knife and passing the segments around. The pirate life is not all battle and plunder. Much of it is simply surviving, day by day, meal by meal. But the greatest feasts come after a successful capture. When you board a merchant ship, the first prize is often not the captain's strongbox, but his private pantry. While your diet is survival, a merchant captain dines well. His stores are a treasure, and your crew descends upon them with joy that no chest of silver could provoke. You might find barrels of French wine or Spanish brandy, sacks of soft white flour for real bread, casks of sugar, spices packed in wooden boxes, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, each worth a small fortune, and sometimes you find live chickens in their coops, or a pig brought aboard for the captain's table. These living provisions are greeted like royalty. That night, your ship becomes a floating banquet hall. The cook becomes the most important man aboard. The smell of roasting meat fills the air from bow to stern. You eat freshly baked bread instead of weevil-riddled biscuit. You drink stolen wine from tin mugs and sing sea shanties with your brothers until the stars wheel slowly overhead. For a few hours you live better than any merchant captain. This is the reward. This is the merry life you chose. You are full for the first time in months. The ship is well stocked. The threat of scurvy has been pushed back by fresh food and stolen citrus. Your body feels strong and your spirits burn high, and the night feels generous and without end. But this bounty cannot shield you from everything. A slip of a knife while working the rigging, a bone shattered in a fall, a sudden fever that sweeps through the cramped lower deck like fire through dry grass. These dangers are constant companions, and no feast can ward them off. The sea gives and the sea takes in its own time. The question of what happens when you are seriously hurt is a heavy one. In the world you left, a sick sailor was treated as a useless burden, thrown aside or left to suffer in silence. Here, the articles promise something better. But promises are words on paper. The reality of medicine at sea is another matter entirely. Who does the cutting, the stitching, the desperate work of keeping a man alive when there is no hospital within 100 miles of open water? The answer, when it comes, is as practical and as grim as everything else aboard this ship. It involves a saw, a bottle of rum, and a pair of hands that were trained for a very different kind of work. Chapter 9. The Surgeon's Knife. A battle has ended. The prize is secured and the enemy crew subdued. But on your own deck, several men lie wounded. One clutches a deep sword cut across his forearm, the blood seeping dark between his fingers. Another sits against the mast, pale and silent, his leg shattered below the knee by a flying splinter of wood. The smell of gunpowder still hangs in the air. This is the moment when the ship's surgeon earns his keep, if you are lucky enough to have one. A trained surgeon was the most valued prize a pirate crew could take. When a merchant or naval vessel was captured, the pirates searched for a doctor the way other men searched for gold. His knowledge could save lives that no amount of silver could replace. If a surgeon was found aboard a captured ship, the crew would do everything possible to persuade him to join willingly. He would be offered a full share of the plunder, promised good treatment, and given a respected place aboard. A skilled doctor was one of the very few men a pirate crew might actually force into service, pressing him the way the Navy pressed common sailors. But most pirate ships sailed without a professional doctor. In his absence, the role of surgeon fell to whichever crewman had the most relevant skills. In many cases, this was the ship's carpenter. The logic was grimly practical. The most common major surgery at sea was amputation, and no one aboard was better with a saw than the man who cut and shaped the ship's timber every day. On other ships, the role might fall to the cook, for he was the man most skilled with knives and most accustomed to the sight of flesh being cut. Neither the carpenter nor the cook had formal medical training. They learned by doing, by watching, and by the cruel education of necessity. What they lacked in knowledge, they tried to make up for in speed and steadiness of hand. The surgeon's most important possession was his medicine chest. These chests were themselves a form of treasure, often captured from merchant or naval vessels, along with the surgeon who carried them. Inside, you would find the tools of the trade: saws for bone, sharp knives for flesh, probes for exploring wounds, and forceps for pulling out musket balls lodged deep in muscle. The medicines were a mixture of the useful and the dangerous. The chest might contain laudanum, a powerful liquid painkiller made from opium, which could dull the senses during surgery. It might hold mercury, a common but toxic treatment for venereal disease, and a variety of dried herbs and powders used for fevers and infections. These medicines were precious. They were rationed carefully and never wasted. After a fight, the main deck could be transformed into a makeshift operating theater. Wounded men were laid out on sailcloth, spread over the planking. The surgeon worked quickly, moving from one man to the next, making decisions in moments that would determine who lived and who died. There was no time for hesitation and no room for gentleness. Speed was the greatest mercy he could offer. A deep cut from a sword or a knife would be stitched shut with a simple needle and thread. To stop the bleeding and prevent infection in a world without any knowledge of bacteria, the surgeon would perform cauterization, sealing the wound by pressing a piece of iron, heated red in the galley fire, directly against the open flesh. The hiss and the smell were terrible. For a limb shattered by a cannonball or a musket shot, there was usually only one option: amputation. The ruined arm or leg had to be removed to prevent gangrene, a deadly infection that spread through damaged tissue and was always fatal if left untreated. The carpenter surgeon would prepare his saw, and the men around the patient would hold him down. The wounded man would be given a large dose of rum or laudanum to numb the pain and a leather strap to bite down on. The surgeon would work as fast as he could, cutting through flesh and bone with practiced strokes, then cauterizing the stump to seal the wound. The survival rate was low, but it was better than the certain death that gangrene would bring. Common sicknesses were a more constant threat than battle wounds. Fevers and dysentery could sweep through the crowded, unsanitary ship with terrifying speed, killing more men in a week than a broadside ever could. Scurvy remained a danger on long voyages. Though pirates generally ate better than merchant sailors, They were not immune to the slow wasting of a body starved for fresh food. But here, once again, the pirate code offered something the rest of the seafaring world did not. The compensation system written into the articles was more than a promise. It was honored. When a man lost his arm or his eye in service to the ship, the crew gathered, and the quartermaster counted out the agreed payment in pieces of 8 from the common treasury. The money was paid before any other plunder was divided. It was the first obligation of the Brotherhood. A wounded man would not be cast aside or left to beg on the docks of some colonial port. He would receive his due, openly and without argument, because every man aboard knew that tomorrow it might be his own arm beneath the saw. You watched the surgeon work in the lantern light, his hands steady, his face without expression. You hear the cries of the wounded and the quiet words of the men who hold them still. The deck is slippery beneath your feet. The smell of blood and tar and hot iron mixes with the salt air. This is the cost of the life you have chosen. It is brutal. It is terrifying. But it is not without compassion. The wounded man will be cared for. His brothers will not forget him. And in that small difference lies the heart of what makes this ship unlike any other you have known. The surgeon washes his hands in a bucket of seawater, wipes his saw on a rag, and waits for the next man. Chapter 10. Reading the Sea and Stars. You now understand how the ship is governed, how it is maintained, and how its crew is cared for when the worst happens. But all of this would be for nothing if the ship could not find its way. In the vast expanse of the ocean, with no roads, no landmarks, and no signs, the art of navigation is perhaps the most vital skill on board. The responsibility falls to the captain, and if the crew is fortunate, to a sailing master, a specialist whose entire purpose is to know where the ship is and where it is going. On your vessel, the captain handles this duty himself. He is the navigator, and the lives of every man aboard rest on the accuracy of his calculations and the steadiness of his eye. His most prized possessions are his nautical charts. These are not treasure maps marked with an X. They are precious documents, hand-drawn on parchment, often stolen from the captains of captured ships. They show the outlines of coastlines, the positions of known islands, and warnings about dangerous reefs and currents. They are frequently inaccurate, but they are the best guide anyone has. You watch the navigator unfold a chart across the table in his small cabin, weighting the corners with a pair of pistol balls and a tin mug. The parchment is yellowed and stained with salt. Some of the markings are in Spanish, others in English, others in a hand he cannot read at all. He studies it the way a scholar studies a text, tracing coastlines with his finger. To know his direction, the navigator has the magnetic compass, a needle balanced on a pin inside a wooden box, always pointing north. It sits in a small housing called a binnacle near the ship's wheel, and the helmsman consults it constantly. But direction is only half the problem. You must also know your speed and your distance, and for this the navigator uses a clever device. It is called the chip log. A small piece of wood, weighted with lead along one edge, is tied to a long rope. The rope has knots tied at regular intervals along its length. The chip is thrown from the stern of the ship, and as the vessel moves forward, the rope unspools behind it into the water. Using a small sand glass to measure a precise length of time, the navigator counts the knots that pass through his fingers. The number tells him the ship's speed. The unit of measurement is still called a knot to this day, a word that traces its origin directly back to this simple rope, trailing in the wake of a sailing ship. With compass and chip log, the navigator can determine one crucial coordinate, latitude, the ship's position north or south of the equator. Using an instrument called a quadrant, He measures the angle of the sun at its highest point at noon, or the height of the North Star at night. This angle changes depending on how far north or south you are. The calculation is not simple, but it is reliable. A skilled navigator can fix his latitude within a few miles. You watch the captain stand on the open deck at midday, holding the brass quadrant to his eye, sighting along its edge to the disk of the sun. He adjusts, notes the angle, and retreats to his cabin to work the numbers with a quill and paper. But there is one great mystery of the seas that no instrument can solve during your time. Longitude, the ship's position east or west. There is no reliable way to determine how far you have traveled along the east-west line. This is the single greatest challenge of the age, and it will not be solved until an English clockmaker named John Harrison builds a marine chronometer decades from now. Without a way to measure longitude, sailors rely on a method called dead reckoning. It is more art than science. You start from a known position, the island of Jamaica, for example. You know your heading from the compass. You know your speed from the chip log. After a day, you calculate your new position on the chart. In theory, you should be exactly where the numbers say. But the ocean is not a road. A strong current you cannot see may be pushing you sideways. A storm may have forced you off course. A small error in measuring your speed, repeated over days and weeks, can grow until your position on the chart and your true position in the world are many miles apart. The sea is patient with arithmetic errors. It simply waits. The navigator's art, then, is a constant process of calculation, observation, and intuition. A great navigator reads the natural world, as well as his instruments. The color of the water can hint at its depth. Dark blue for deep ocean, pale green for shallows. Certain species of birds circle only within a day's flight of land, and their presence whispers that a coastline is near. Cloud patterns on the horizon, the direction of the ocean swells, the temperature of the wind, even the smell of the air, all carry information for the man who knows how to read them. The navigator stands at the rail in the evening, watching the sky turn from gold to violet, and in that light, he reads a language the rest of you are only beginning to learn. You understand now the immense skill it takes to guide your floating home across the trackless water. Day after day, the navigator keeps you alive with his charts and his calculations. But charts and stars will not find you a prize. For that, you need a different kind of skill. The ability to hunt, to deceive, and to terrify. The black flag is waiting. Chapter 11. The Spoils and the Shore. With the prize taken and the smoke still drifting from the cannons, the real business of piracy begins. Not in the fight, but in what comes after. The merchant ship drifted beside yours, the two vessels still lashed together by grappling ropes. Thin trails of smoke curled upward from the deck, where small fires had been stamped out. The wounded lay against the railings, breathing hard, their hands pressed against cuts and bruises. A strange quiet settled over both ships, broken only by the slow creak of wood and the lap of waves against the joined hulls. The quartermaster stepped forward before anyone else moved. His voice carried across the deck with a calm authority that cut through the fog of adrenaline. No man was to touch a single item from the captured vessel without his direct instruction. The plunder belonged to the company as a whole, and any sailor caught slipping a coin into his own pocket before the general division would answer for it, under the articles. A small team followed the quartermaster aboard the merchant ship. They moved through the hold with practiced purpose, counting barrels and crates, checking the weight of sacks and the markings on wooden chests. One man kept a written tally on a scrap of damp parchment. Every bolt of cloth, every cask of sugar, Every pouch of spice was entered into the record with careful attention. The real treasure was rarely gold. The hold of the captured vessel was stacked with heavy barrels of Caribbean sugar, dark bundles of Virginia tobacco, and sealed jars of indigo dye worth more than their weight in silver. These were the goods that moved the trade routes of the Atlantic, and in the right port, they could be turned into a small fortune for every man aboard. Cannons were unbolted from the merchant ship's deck and hoisted across to your vessel. Coils of fresh rope, barrels of clean gunpowder, spare sailcloth, and carpentry tools were all transferred with the same deliberate care. Even the personal belongings of the captured officers, silver buckles, pocket watches, leather-bound books, and bottles of brandy were added to the common pile on the main deck. The captured crew watched in silence from where they sat, hands bound loosely behind their backs. Most would be released unharmed, set adrift in their lightened vessel, or put ashore at the nearest coast. The pirates had no interest in holding prisoners. They wanted cargo, not captives, and a reputation for mercy toward those who surrendered without a fight served their future interests well. When the inventory was finished, and every item of value had been carried across, the grappling ropes were cut. The merchant ship, riding higher in the water, now that its hold was nearly empty, drifted slowly away. Its crew scrambled to reset their remaining sails. Within an hour, it was a distant shape on the horizon, shrinking toward nothing beneath the late afternoon sun. Your own ship turned south, heading for a sheltered harbor where the cargo could be sold. The mood aboard shifted from the tight discipline of battle to something lighter and looser. Men laughed, slapped each other on the back, and passed around tin mugs of grog. The worst was behind them. The prize was aboard. All that remained was to reach port and turn goods into coin. The port appeared after several days of easy sailing, a shallow bay fringed with palms and dotted with ramshackle wooden buildings. Thin plumes of cooking smoke rose above the tree line. Other vessels sat at anchor in the harbor, their masts rocking gently with the tide. This was one of the scattered pirate-friendly settlements that clung to the edges of the Caribbean, beyond the reach of any European governor. On shore, merchants waited who asked no questions about the origins of the cargo. They inspected the barrels of sugar and the bundles of tobacco with knowing hands, offered their prices, and haggled with the quartermaster under the shade of a canvas awning. The negotiations could take a day or more, but in the end, every barrel found a buyer, and every bolt of cloth was weighed against a stack of silver coins. Then came the moment the entire crew had been waiting for. The men gathered on the main deck in the fading light of evening. The quartermaster stood before them with the full accounting. Before any shares were paid, the compensation fund was opened. A sailor who had lost 2 fingers in the fight stepped forward and received his payment, counted out carefully from the ship's treasury. Another man, whose shoulder had been torn by a musket ball, was given his due. The articles were honored first, always. After the wounded had been paid, the remaining sum was divided according to the shares written in the code. The captain took his portion, then the quartermaster, then each man in turn. You stepped forward when your name was called, and the quartermaster counted a stack of coins into a cloth pouch and placed it in your hand. The weight of it felt impossible. More money than you had held in your entire life before this moment. The longboats carried the crew to shore. The sensation of solid ground beneath your feet after weeks of constant motion was strange and unsteady, as though the earth itself were swaying. The sandy path led upward toward a row of low taverns built from driftwood and salvaged planks. Smoke poured from open doorways. The smell of roasting pork and strong rum drifted down the beach like a warm hand pulling you forward. Inside the nearest tavern, the noise was almost as violent as battle. Men crowded shoulder to shoulder around rough-cut tables, shouting over games of dice. A fiddler played in the corner, though his melody was nearly drowned by laughter and the slam of mugs on wood. You traded a coin for a bottle of rum, not the watered grog of the ship, but the real spirit, dark and burning. The money left your hands with astonishing speed. You ate fresh roasted meat until your stomach ached. You bought a linen shirt to replace the salt-stiffened rags on your back. You lost a handful of coins at a dice game and won half of them back an hour later. Around you, men who had risked their life stoofed together, spent their fortunes with the same reckless courage they brought to battle. No one saved. No one planned for a distant future that might never arrive. A week passed in a blur of food, drink, and noise. One morning you reached into your pouch and found it nearly empty. The fortune that had felt so heavy in your palm was gone, traded for a few days of warmth, laughter, and the feeling of being alive on solid ground. The pattern was the same for every man in the crew. What was earned in months was spent in days. The quartermaster's whistle cut through the haze of the final morning on shore. The ship had been cleaned, its hull scraped free of barnacles, its stores refilled with fresh water and dried provisions. It was time to return. You walked back down the sandy path toward the longboats, your pockets light, but your belt carrying a new pistol bought with the last of your silver. As the shore fell behind and the familiar creak of the ship's timbers surrounded you once more, the cycle began again. The open sea stretched ahead, empty and patient. The watch bells would ring, the sails would need trimming, and the horizon would hold nothing but sky and water for days or weeks to come. The wild week on land already felt like something half-remembered, fading into the rhythm of rope, wind, and wave. The great pendulum of pirate life had swung back, from the chaos of shore to the quiet discipline of the sea, from the roar of the tavern to the lonely cry of a gull overhead. You settled into your hammock, that first night back aboard, listening to the deep groan of the hull and the breathing of the men around you, and you understood the shape of this life more clearly than ever, a long, slow patience, broken by brief bursts of danger and reward. Then patience again, stretching out toward the horizon like the sea itself. Chapter 12. The Fading Flag. The Golden Age was never meant to last. Built on defiance and held together by a code written on borrowed parchment, the Pirate Republic drifted slowly toward its end, and into something else entirely. Between the prizes, the sea gave nothing but silence. Days stretched into weeks without a sail on the horizon. The work of the watch filled your hands, tarring ropes, scrubbing decks, checking the cannons. But the mind wandered into a heavy, restless stillness. You learned quickly that boredom was its own kind of enemy, as dangerous to morale as any storm or warship. It was in those quiet hours that the fiddler became the most important man aboard. He sat on a coiled rope near the foremast in the evenings, drawing his bow across the strings. The melody drifted out over the water, thin and sweet and impossibly lonely. Men stopped what they were doing to listen. Some leaned against the railing with their eyes closed. The music turned the emptiness of the ocean into something almost bearable. When heavy work needed doing, hoisting an anchor, or hauling up a yard of sail, a different kind of song filled the ship. The shantyman called out a line in a rough, clear voice, and the crew roared back the chorus together, pulling on the ropes in time with the rhythm. The song turned the labor of many men into a single motion. Without it, the heaviest tasks would have been nearly impossible. At night, In the dim glow of a single lantern, men gathered on the forward deck and traded stories. Some were boasts, exaggerated tales of past fights and narrow escapes. Others were ghost stories about phantom ships drifting through fog without a living crew aboard. Some were simply news, gathered in the last port, which governors were offering pardons, which sea lanes were being patrolled, which merchant routes still carried valuable cargo unguarded. It was in these storytelling hours that the legends began to grow. Tales were told of captains who buried vast treasures on hidden islands, marking the spot with secret maps. Men spoke of prisoners forced to walk a narrow plank over shark-filled waters. You heard about parrots perched on the shoulders of famous captains, repeating their orders in a shrill voice. The stories were vivid, and they passed from ship to ship like currency. But you had lived long enough in this world to see the gap between legend and daily truth. No captain you had sailed with ever buried treasure. The money was divided on deck, according to the articles, and what remained was spent on shore within the week. There was nothing left to bury, and no pirate you knew had any interest in saving coins for a future that might end at the next horizon. Walking the plank was another invention, a picture that belonged to tavern tales and penny pamphlets, not to the working deck of a real ship. When violence was necessary, it was swift and practical. A blade, a pistol shot, or simply a man thrown over the railing into the sea. No one wasted time constructing a theatrical stage for an execution that could be done in a moment. And the parrots, they were a curiosity at best. A few sailors passing through the tropics might have kept a bright feathered bird for amusement, but the creature would have been a liability in any fight, squawking and flapping in the smoke and noise. The parrot on the shoulder was a storyteller's detail, charming but untrue, born not from history, but from the pages of a novel that had not yet been written. The real world was changing around you in ways that no story could soften. The great empires of Europe, England, Spain, France, had spent years fighting each other across the Atlantic, leaving the sea lanes poorly guarded. That war was ending. Treaties were signed. And the powerful navies that had been busy with each other were now turning their cannons toward you. The first sign was the King's pardon. A royal proclamation reached the ports of the Caribbean, offering full amnesty to any pirate who surrendered before a set date. For older sailors, tired and scarred, the pardon was a door back into the world they had left behind. Many walked through it quietly, swearing an oath to the crown and disappearing into ordinary lives. The brotherhood thinned with every name that was struck from the rolls. Then came the warships. Fast, well-armed frigates began patrolling the routes your crew had once owned. They were captained by experienced naval officers who understood the sea as well as any pirate, and their crews were trained marines carrying muskets and fixed bayonets. Your sloop, so deadly against a merchant vessel, was a fragile thing beside a Royal Navy frigate with 40 guns and a disciplined broadside. New governors arrived in the colonial ports with orders to stamp out piracy entirely. One of them, a former privateer named Woodes Rogers, sailed into Nassau itself, the heart of the pirate republic, with warships at his back and the king's pardon in his hand. He offered mercy to those who surrendered and promised the noose to those who did not. The republic that had governed itself by code and vote crumbled in a matter of weeks. The cruelest blow was the use of former brothers as hunters. Pirates who had accepted the pardon were hired to track down the crews they had once sailed with. They knew the hidden coves, the secret signals, the favorite anchorages. The Brotherhood was no longer simply under attack from outside. It was being devoured from within, its own knowledge turned into a weapon against it. One by one, the famous captains met their ends. Some fell in battle. Blackbeard died fighting on the deck of his own ship, surrounded by naval soldiers, his blood soaking into the planks he had walked 1,000 times. Others were captured and carried in chains to colonial ports, where they stood trial in courts that offered no mercy and no appeal. Their bodies were hung in iron cages at the harbor entrance, swaying in the salt wind as a warning to every sailor who passed beneath. A few slipped away. They took the pardon, changed their names, and vanished into the colonies. Farmers, shopkeepers, nameless men who never spoke of the years they had spent under the black flag. Their stories ended not with a battle or a noose, but with silence, which was perhaps the strangest fate of all for men who had once made the whole Atlantic tremble. The ships rotted, the flags were taken down or lost to the wind. Within a generation, the Golden Age of Piracy had passed from living memory into something else, a collection of stories told in taverns, written down in books, and slowly shaped into the bright, romantic legend that would outlast the truth by centuries. The desperate men who had chosen a short life over a miserable one became dashing heroes in novels and paintings, their suffering polished away, their hunger forgotten, their fear replaced by charm, and so the sea reclaimed its silence. The trade routes that had once been stalked by sloops flying black flags carried their cargo in peace. The harbors where pirates had spent their silver grew into orderly colonial towns. The world moved on, but the stories remained. Quieter now, softer, changed by every telling, drifting through the years like a ship without an anchor, never quite reaching shore, never quite disappearing beneath the waves. If this journey has carried you gently through the evening, you are welcome to stay a little longer next time. A quiet tap on the subscribe button is all it takes. For now, let the sound of the water fade. Let the lantern dim, and let the old wooden ship, with all its ropes and sails, drift slowly out beyond the horizon, into the dark and patient sea. Chapter 13, From History into Legend. The real pirates vanished from the seas within a single generation. But the story they left behind would be told and retold, shaped and softened, until it became something the men who lived it would hardly recognize. The last pirate trials were held in stone courtrooms near the harbor, where the smell of salt water drifted through the open windows. Judges in heavy wigs read the sentences aloud to crowded galleries. Printers set the courtroom transcripts into cheap pamphlets and sold them on the streets of London before the ink was fully dry. The public could not get enough. Every detail of pirate life, the articles, the battles, the plunder, was devoured with a fascination that bordered on hunger. In 1724, while a handful of the last Golden Age captains were still being hunted across distant waters, a book appeared in the London bookshops. Its title was long, as titles were in those days: A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates. The author's name was given as Captain Charles Johnson, though no one has ever been certain who he truly was. The book was an instant sensation. It gathered together the stories of dozens of pirate captains: Blackbeard, Calico Jack Rackham, Bartholomew Roberts, and the famous female pirates Anne Bonny and Mary Read, and presented them as vivid, dramatic biographies. Johnson wrote with the confidence of a man who had studied trial records and interviewed sailors, and many of his details matched what was already known from court documents. But Johnson was also a storyteller, and he understood that facts alone would not hold a reader's attention through 400 pages. He sharpened the characters, heightened the drama, and gave each captain a distinct personality: the fearsome Blackbeard, with slow-burning fuses woven into his beard, the elegant Bartholomew Roberts who drank only tea. These portraits were drawn from truth, but they were polished until they gleamed. The book became the foundation upon which every pirate story that followed would be built. For more than a century, Johnson's history was the definitive text. It was translated, reprinted, borrowed from, and quoted without credit. The captains he described became fixed in the public imagination, not as desperate men fleeing poverty, but as larger-than-life figures walking a stage between glory and doom. Then, in the late years of the 19th century, a Scottish writer changed everything. Robert Louis Stevenson was looking for a story to write for his young stepson when he sat down one rainy afternoon and drew a map of an imaginary island. The shape of the coastline, the inlets and hills marked with careful detail, stirred something in his imagination. He began to write, and within weeks, the novel that would define the pirate myth forever was taking shape beneath his pen. Treasure Island was published in 1883, and nothing about the way the world saw pirates would ever be the same. Stevenson took one rare, exceptional case from history. Captain William Kidd, who had buried a portion of his wealth before his capture, and made buried treasure the central obsession of all piracy. The secret map, the island, the X drawn in red ink marking the spot, none of it had any real basis in the Golden Age. It was pure invention, and it was irresistible. His greatest creation was the character of Long John Silver, the one-legged ship's cook, with a parrot named Captain Flint perched on his shoulder. Silver was charming, intelligent, and terrifying in equal measure. He smiled while he plotted. He told jokes while he schemed. He was the first fictional pirate who was neither a simple villain nor a simple hero, but something in between, a man you could not help but admire, even as you feared him. From Long John Silver came nearly every detail the modern world associates with pirates. The wooden leg, the talking parrot, the treasure map, the moral ambiguity of a man who lives outside the law but follows his own rough code of honor. All of these were born in the pages of Stevenson's novel. They had little to do with history. They had everything to do with the power of a well-told story to replace the truth it was built upon. The 20th century brought a new medium, and the pirate legend found its perfect home. Hollywood took the romantic adventure of Stevenson's novel and gave it moving images, orchestral music, and the faces of handsome actors. In the 1930s and 40s, stars like Errol Flynn swung from ropes on studio-built ship decks, dueling with elegant swords and winning the hearts of beautiful women in flowing gowns. In these films, the sea was always blue and the wind was always fair. The pirates were clean, witty, and noble. The blood was absent. The scurvy was forgotten. The stench of the bilge, the weevils in the hardtack, the screams of men under the surgeon's saw. All of it was erased. What remained was pure adventure, bright and weightless, stripped of every shadow that had made the real life bearable only because the alternative had been worse. By the turn of the 21st century, the transformation was complete. The pirate of popular imagination had traveled so far from his origins that the two figures, the historical sailor and the fictional hero, could no longer recognize each other. One had chosen the black flag because the merchant ship's whip had left scars across his back. The other chose it because freedom looked good beneath a tricorn hat and a setting sun. The man who had signed the articles with a shaking hand, knowing that the noose waited at the end of every voyage, had become a character who winked at death and always escaped. The desperate democracy of the quartermaster's code, born from real suffering and real injustice, had become a quaint backdrop for comedy and spectacle. The legend had swallowed the history whole, and what it left behind was something beautiful, hollow, and almost entirely untrue. And yet, perhaps the legend endured because it carried a fragment of something real. Beneath the parrots and the treasure maps, beneath the wooden legs and the Jolly Rogers flying from studio masts, there remained the echo of a genuine human impulse, the desire to escape a world that offered nothing but labor and obedience, and to build, however briefly, a society where every man had a voice and every man received his share. That impulse was real. The men who lived it paid for it with short, hard lives. Most of them died young, on the deck of a burning ship, at the end of a naval rope, or in the quiet obscurity of a pardon that erased their names from history. They did not think of themselves as legends. They thought of themselves as men who had made a choice, and who lived with its consequences until the sea or the law collected what was owed. The night has grown late. The old ship, with all its tarred ropes and patched sails, has carried us as far as it can. The harbor lights are fading behind the headland. The water is calm, and the sky is wide and full of stars that once guided real men across real oceans to uncertain ends. Their world is gone now, but the sound of it, the creak of timber, the snap of canvas, the low song of a fiddle on an empty sea, still drifts across the centuries if you listen closely enough. If this voyage has been a gentle companion through your evening, you are always welcome aboard again. A quiet word of support, a like, a subscription, is a kindness that keeps these stories sailing. But for now, let the anchor drop, let the lantern go dark, and let the tide carry you softly, gently towards sleep.